Welcome to the Life After Sugar podcast, the podcast that's not just about sugar, but about your relationship with it and also with food and especially with yourself. So if you want to discover your life after sugar and hear inspiring stories from all kinds of people who also cut out sugar in their way, at their pace, for their own reasons, this is the podcast for you. Because when you take away the sugar, you can finally discover the real sweetness in your life. I'm your host, Netta Gorman, and in today's episode, I'd like to share with you Grace's very touching story. Now, Grace was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and after years on meds, she discovered that a whole foods diet, which automatically excludes sugar, made an amazing difference in her health. We'll get to our chat in just a minute. But first, I just wanted to say that if this is your first time here, then welcome and thank you for listening to this podcast. And whether you're new or a regular and you haven't yet rated or reviewed this podcast, could I ask you to scroll down and tap on the stars to rate this podcast and also to write a short review to let me know how this podcast is helping you in your life after sugar. I love reading your reviews. And when you rate and review this podcast, not only does it encourage me to continue making new episodes, but it also helps to share this podcast and have more people see it so that we can help more people feel better and lose weight with less sugar. So again, thank you for rating and reviewing this podcast and for spreading the word about sugar. All right, let's get to my chat with Grace.
Yes, so I was diagnosed with MS in it sounds like a million years ago, in 1993. And so that made me think about health, but I really didn't want to. And so for a long time, I was trying to bulldoze through and not, I was trying to finish a doctorate. And so I finished my doctorate. And the only way I was able to do that, I think, is thinking about it now, it's more in spite of the medicines I was taking than because of the medicines I was taking. But I started out with being diagnosed and being rushed off to the neurologist, top MS neurologist in the States. I was in San Francisco, and there's a great center there. And so they gave me all of these disease-modifying drugs, which are supposed to protect you from having attacks and things like that. Because the thing about MS is that it tends to be episodic, and so they try to make medicines that will stop you having attacks, but in my experience, it doesn't really work that way. And the only real resource they have is to give you a whole lot of steroids when you do have an attack. And so I went along like bouncing in and out of the hospital every 3 or 4 months because I would keep having these attacks, and to keep me from losing all function, they would just give me mega doses of steroids. And that went along for like 11 years. And luckily, after 11 years, I ended up being pregnant. And the first thing the doctor said was that you have to stop taking those medicines because they're too toxic. I was like, oh, okay. But of course, they didn't have anything else they could do for me. So they kind of shooed me away and left me on my own, which was actually a great thing because it allowed me to meet a really wonderful midwife who turned out to be a very important mentor for me and is still a very good family friend. She's the first person who ever talked to me about physiology because my folks are nuclear physicists. And they were very pro medicine and pro like research, and because they're research scientists, and they never really thought about, well, what does it mean to be in a research project? You get to be the guinea pig, which is a very honorable thing to do, but it means they have no idea what they're doing. and it they don't really care if it goes well for you or badly for you, because they just assume that a certain percentage of people are going to have bad reactions, and a certain number of people are going to have some help from medicine, and the whether it's plus or minus for them doesn't really matter. They just put you on a graph, um, and it doesn't for them. It doesn't matter what your individual experience is. Of course, for me, it makes a big difference what my individual experience is, and mine was very bad, um, very bad. And so after 11 years, they kept saying, "Oh well, this drug isn't working. Let's double the dose. Oh, it's still not working. Let's give you another drug, and let's see what's you know." So I was taking three different things, and double dose of one, and a single dose of another one, and a bunch of other stuff. Um, and it was clearly messing up my whole immune system, because I was starting to get um, really bad allergies and
Really bad what, sorry?
allergies.
Mm,
I was becoming allergic to practically everything, even like apples and pears, which usually people don't have trouble with.
yeah.
Um, and uh, and I was getting strange purple spots on my legs, and they would send me to the dermatology clinic, and the dermatologist would say, "Oh, you've got purpura palpabilis," which just means raised purple bumps. And I said, "Well, thank you. I could probably tell you that anyway." In Italian or in English, you told me in Latin this, thank you, but it's not very useful. Um, so and they didn't know what to do, so I would get these raised purple bumps, and they give me another drug, uh, which I turned out to be violently allergic to, and it gave me like really horrible, like instant vomiting, and dizziness and fainting, whatever. It was awful. um, and so they took me off of that, but it hadn't resolved the purple bumps. It had given me another really toxic reaction, um, and they were admitting that they really didn't know what to do with me. So they were saying, well, maybe this isn't multiple sclerosis. Maybe it's like they gave me a title, less like syndrome, which is like lupus like syndrome.
That's still an autoimmune thing?
Yeah, it's another one of those basket things that you've got a system that's going completely haywire. They don't know what to do with you, and so they stick another label on you.
Yeah.
Um, but it doesn't mean that they know what to do. Uh, it means they're kind of scared, because they know they're really harming you. And they say, well, we could give her chemotherapy drugs, but that's not sustainable. And it's like, well, this is not sustainable anyway. And it was getting very like the doctors really didn't know what to do with me. And so it was a very lucky thing when I got pregnant. And they sort of took their hands off and said, well, we can't deal with this, because we don't know what to do in this kind of situation.
They took you off of all meds?
Yes.
Was this in the States or in Italy?
Well, it started out, I was in the States, and then I came to Italy, um, and they continued the same medications, because the center here was studying the same uh, constellation of drugs that they were studying in San Francisco, and they were saying, "Oh, great, we can continue the same study," and I thought that was a good thing. Then I went to Toronto, where they were also doing the same thing.
Ah,
Yeah, so they had the same. It was 1990s, uh, and so that was the cutting edge therapy at the time, and that all the most forward looking centers were all doing this stuff, um, and trying to put together a database. And so I think um, I'm a data point that isn't very useful for them. Um, so
and at any point, did anyone ask you, what you were eating or about your lifestyle?
oh, that's the thing, is that none of the medical people would say anything about diet or lifestyle or anything that you can't measure. I mean, I used to tease my parents about not believing in anything that you can measure with an oscilloscope.
Hmm.
Um, but they don't. I mean, it's because of the way things are set up. If they can't make an experiment that's repeatable with a double blind, whatever, um, they don't have an experiment, and so they don't have any data about that, which
Hmm.
means that for them, it's not an interesting question.
Yeah.
Um, so there are no precedents. Okay, so no precedents because nobody ever thought about how to. I mean, obviously, you can't study diet with a double blind because you know what you had for dinner, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
know whether you had, you know,
But
junk food or real food. And so nobody had. I asked, well, are there any? Do you think if I eat in a certain way, would it be helpful? And no doctor would ever state anything. No, so they
mm,
would say, well, I think somebody actually did say, well, they say you are what you eat, but that's in a totally unscientific way, right?
yeah.
Kind of with a smile, and yeah, so nobody would ever say anything, and so it was thanks to this midwife um, that I started to think about, well, okay, well, it makes sense. You are what you eat doesn't sound that nonsensical. Maybe it's not very scientific, but it totally makes sense. And she said, well, have you ever uh, thought about physiology? And I was like, well, I kind of know what physiology is. What is that practically? What does that mean? Um, and then it completely changed my worldview because all of a sudden instead of trying to suppress an immune system that's gone berserk, I was trying to say, okay, so my immune system is doing something strange. Why? Why isn't it doing what it's supposed to do? What caused it to go off haywire like this? And what can I do to get it back on track? And so I started to read, and it was a very good thing uh, that I, because when I got pregnant, one of my dear friends sent me a stack of books, like 25 books, um, about all kinds of things, about natural childbirth and about um, child raising in different cultures and birth in different cultures and like sleep in different cultures and
Hmm.
about diet and nutrition and things like that. And so this really got me thinking about a lot of the different things. I mean, I had been studying Dante and you know classics and things like that, and never really thought about um, the nuts and bolts of biologically what is going on.
Yeah.
I mean, I had some idea about how this molecule was supposed to mimic the behavior of the natural molecule that's found in the nerves and whatever. That I understand because I had a fair amount of like being physicist children, we got a lot of uh, hard science at home,
Yeah.
um, but not from the point of view of physiology.
Or
Um,
nutrition.
no, no, because that's another thing that doctors really don't study very much of. Um, Everybody says it's like a month of, of class, maybe.
And it's also the downside of nutrition science, in air quotes, it can hardly ever be scientific to ask people to, lock them in a room and make them eat things and not eat other things and over a long period
Right.
of time. It's not ethical.
No, that would be torture. I think.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I don't think that's. You're right. Not ethical and completely not acceptable. Um, Yeah. And so when my son was born, I mean, when I was pregnant, I ate more or less what I normally ate. Um, and I was careful about not eating things I was allergic to because I had become allergic to so many different things. So it was kind of limited, but not even more limited than when I started, when I became pregnant. It was after he was born and after he started getting teeth that I really started um, exploring, okay, since the microbiome has a lot to do with how your immune system behaves and how it develops, I knew that the order in which my son was introduced to different foods had a lot to do with how his microbiome would be developing. And so our midwife was saying, okay, if he's got no teeth, no food except milk, because he's not supposed to eat anything. He doesn't have any teeth. It's obvious. Um, and she said, okay, just follow the teeth, because as soon as he's got bunny teeth, then you know that he can eat bunny food, right? So that's
Mhm.
fruits, vegetables, and yeah, you're going to chop them up and maybe blend them up or whatever so that he can eat them even though he's got only two teeth. And I was eating exactly the same things that he was eating, and I was
Wow.
observing myself too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was very, very exciting. Um, very boring in terms of culinary, but I mean, it was kind of a challenge because how do I make something good with only millet and carrots and maybe olive
Wow.
oil and salt. Um, or what can I put in to make it interesting? So now we can add celery. Now we can add, so just one new food at a time. And as time went on, of course, the number of ingredients I could use became always greater, right? So there was always more possibility of making things that were interesting to eat. But that's what I did for the whole time that he was teething. Um, and
And
we
would it
didn't
be
do.
accurate to say that it was your son, in a way, or feeding your son, that kind of taught you about how to feed yourself? I want to take a quick break to say that if you're looking for some free resources about how to cut sugar, then I have plenty for you. Come check out the Life After Sugar Facebook page and subscribe to the Life After Sugar YouTube channel, as well as my Instagram account at My Life After Sugar. You can also check out my TikTok account at Netta_Life After Sugar. And if cravings are getting in the way and causing you to fall off the wagon, then I have 5 tips for you, especially if you're an intermittent faster, to help you get rid of cravings. You can find those 5 tips in the description of this episode in the show notes, or go to aftersugarclub.com.
It was this idea that when we started this, um, I knew that I had a lot of trouble with food, and I was kind of paranoid of all foods, because I didn't know what I would react to and how I'd react to it. And usually, in my experience, when I had a reaction to a food, it also meant that I was going to have a problem with my MS, like flare. And so it was this very, very scary um, arena. Um, and so during this whole weaning process, the midwife never said, you should eat like this. I was the one who said, well, what if I did the same thing if I fed my son the same things as I ate, or vice versa? What if I ate the things that I was feeding him? Um, and she said, well, why not? Try it.
Yeah.
And it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. Um, because then, by the time he was eating everything, he wasn't allergic to anything. I wasn't allergic to anything, even the things I had been allergic to before. I was like,
Wow.
wow, okay. So that means that allergies are not genetic. They aren't things that you're just born with. It means that you can have a lot of control over how your body reacts to stuff.
How can you be allergic one bit of your life, but then not anymore? How is that possible?
My experience was that I had become very allergic to a lot of different things. And once I basically rebuilt my digestive system, my whole microbiome, I realized that's what I was doing. Um, all of a sudden, I wasn't allergic to what I had been allergic to before. And I also noticed before that, when I was growing up, yeah, I had some allergies. I was allergic to mosquitoes, and then I realized I was allergic to fish, but not a lot of things. And so I didn't identify myself as being an allergic person, or somebody whose life revolved around allergies. With all the drugs, that pulled out a whole lot of different allergies, which I was very, very happy to see disappear after I did this experiment with my son. And so, yeah, so I think that allergies they aren't genetic. They're just a symptom of intoxication.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it makes sense, doesn't it? And it sounds like you were eating and feeding your son a whole foods diet, basically.
Yes, yes, very. So everything was organic. Everything was whole foods. Um, Very simple cooking methods. I mean, I don't think I gave him anything fried until he was like 3. Um,
Mm.
and no gluten, no sugar, no added sugar. He had fruit and things like that, but not added sugar or added uh, anything. Not even a whole lot of salt. Some salt, not a lot.
Hmm.
And olive oil. since we live in Italy. um, yeah, so very simple, but I used herbs and I used herbs and spices to make things tasty. I didn't avoid soy, except I knew that, I mean, I wouldn't have given him soy in the States because I know it's all there's a lot of it is transgenic. Um, but here there's a certain amount of protection that they're not allowed to sell GMO.
Okay.
And so one of his favorite foods we discovered when he started eating legumes um, is like silken tofu.
Oh
You
yeah.
know, yeah, he just loves that. He still loves it. Um, Everything had its own flavor, right?
Yeah.
So we have like, okay, so they're carrots, they've been boiled, they're mashed with a fork, and maybe there's a pinch of salt on them.
Yeah, and they actually
Like
taste like
that.
carrots, and
Exactly.
why would they taste of anything else? Why would we want them to taste of anything else?
Yeah, and why should I blend it up with something else so that you can't taste it?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and there's always this idea
Which is
that,
what the food industry does for us.
yeah, yeah, and it's also, I mean, people would say, "Oh, he's so good. He eats all his vegetables." Like, well, because he likes vegetables. Because I didn't try to fool him into thinking they were something else. I mean, why should I? What's so bad about a vegetable? I mean, if you don't have a belief system that vegetables are yucky, they're not yucky. They're good. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah. It's this it's sort of a double-edged message that we get. Eat your vegetables, but if you want to have fun or, be like have some kind of a treat, then it's got to be without vegetable. It's got to be sugary, sweet. It's like, yeah, this double message. You're like, what are you talking about?
well, it's designed by people who uh, have serious trauma about vegetables because their parents didn't like vegetables, right? And so they don't know how to cook them in a way that's tasty. They don't know how to cook them in the way that the nutritional properties are conserved. Um, and they don't have any like they're not delighted by the flavor of a carrot. I mean, or a vegetable that really tastes like that thing. Um, and it was lucky that we live in Italy, and there's a certain amount of um, I mean, Italian cuisine is very simple. It's not There's not a lot of heavy sauces, and there's not a lot of disguising the ingredients. I mean, the Italian food is good because it's based on good ingredients put
Hmm.
together in a very simple way, um, which is a very logical way to prepare things. Um, each region highlights a different aspect of each ingredient, and it's delightful. That's part of what's so much fun about living in Italy, is that everything is locally. I mean, we looked for
Fantastic.
locally grown, not organic, and not too much sprays, as natural produce as possible, raised by that farmer and this other lady. And so we would go and get, she's got good melons and they're in season. And so really, really following the seasons and following, um, buying things only from people who grew them locally, that that they grew them in that place and they didn't buy them from some big distributor. Um,
Yeah, yeah, that is fantastic, isn't it?
yeah.
And when you changed your diet when you had your son, how did that affect your multiple sclerosis, your MS?
Okay. Well, if I had been having attacks 3 or 5 times, like every 3 months, I would have an attack. And once I started doing this, I had no attacks ever. Like nothing ever happened again for it's now been almost 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah. Yet not even like, yeah, okay, there was sometimes I was like, well, I don't know, I feel kind of iffy because if I got tired. Um, but I never had to go to the hospital. I never had to take steroids. I never started taking those drugs again. Um, Nothing. And I mean, I had understood some techniques for stopping an attack, um, or stopping any infection, just naturally. I mean, historically, um, doctors would give you a purge if you had a fever, right?
Okay.
And so that's emptying the intestine. We know that, I don't know, of our 30 trillion cells, there are at least 10 times as many cells in the gut,
Yeah.
um, that are symbiotic, and if they're not behaving well, the fastest thing you can do is get rid of them, and then stop the whatever's going on with your symptoms. And I mean, maybe you take some what do you call them? Probiotics.
Probiotics.
Yeah,
Okay, so
right.
you would like purge the gut and then take probiotics. And I always talk about
Afterwards.
probiotic foods rather than probiotic capsules, and then like repopulate the gut.
Yeah, yeah. There are ways that people like lead up to this kind of cleansing, and traditionally that after that you're supposed to eat only very cook into a mush kind of dal, so like lentils and maybe rice or whatever. And yeah, I would be careful about what I ate after that. Not a whole lot, because it's your system is kind of reeling. Um, but yeah, slowly I would start eating, maybe drink some juice, or uh, have some plain rice, or like plain vegetables or whatever. And after that, the next day you're feeling great.
And so the objective of this whole exercise is to sort of reset your gut, as it were.
Yeah, yeah, and I think I didn't realize I was doing that at the time. But looking back, I realized that must have been what I was doing. And
Okay.
looking back at the way I was raised, I mean, I know that I wasn't nursed for more than like a month, and then I was always bottle fed. And my parents had no criteria about what they gave me. I mean, my mother had, since she was this, she's a nuclear physicist, she's not a nutritionist. And so her idea was that it's a mechanical problem, that you can't eat food because you don't have any teeth, so we'll just blend it up. Um, so she would blend meat and vegetables and rice and everything all together. Um, I don't remember having a hard time being fed, but I do remember uh, being fed more than, or more quickly than I wanted to be fed, and I don't remember what they were feeding me. But looking at the way other kids reacted to the way their parents were uh, feeding them in Italy, I realized that, gosh, I can't imagine, or I can imagine, unfortunately, being force fed this everything mixed up together
Mush.
half.
And when you were growing up, this was in the States, right? Because you moved to Italy later in your life.
Right. I came when I was, oh gosh, um, I came when I was 24. So I had been diagnosed already. And then because I was diagnosed just before coming to I had already applied to the program in Italy, and I got accepted. And then I refused to let this diagnosis get in the way of my studies. And so I said, I'm going to do it anyway. And so I took all that medication. I had it shipped to me from the States. Um, and I would show up to class with like, uh, IV lines stuck in my arm, because they would do this for IV steroids for 5 days in a row, 6 days in a row, depending on how bad it was. But I didn't want to let anything get in the way of my studies, which is, thinking about it now, I think crazy. And that's probably why I was so sick. But yeah, so seriously different priorities at that time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and yes, it's understandable because we do the best with what we know, including your parents, you
Oh
know.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, do I understand that it's been over 20 years that you've been eating a whole foods diet, which automatically excludes added sugars, and you feel good?
I feel good energy. I mean, I have enough energy that I wanted to do a program like Kendra's program. It gave me, I mean, I did make one terrible mistake, which is in 1997, I had a hepatitis booster shot, and that really threw me for a loop. I was in the hospital for 10 days on steroids, and I never really regained the function of my legs properly.
Wow.
Um, so yeah, so I walk around with trekking poles,
Okay.
but my balance is still really terrible, and I'm still working on that, and it's been a long time. Um, but that's what I'm working on. I haven't had any, because the MS has this up and down kind of progression or non-progression. And I haven't had that happen since before my son came.
Yeah. Okay. From what I understand, I know very little about multiple sclerosis, but
Sorry?
what I understand, it's seen as a degenerative condition, isn't it?
Yes, yes, and they try to tell you in the least scary way possible. But if you talk to the people in support groups, they say, well, you'll probably be in a wheelchair by the time you're 50. Um,
Yeah.
and this is my parents, bless them. They were going to support groups and they were terrified because that's what they heard, and they were imagining all kinds of horrible things. And of course, they didn't say anything to me, which is great. I'm sorry that they suffered through this so much because they were absolutely terrified. Um, and also sort of accepting that this was going to be my fate. Um, I refused to read anything or to listen to anything about what they had to say about multiple sclerosis, because I know that a diagnosis is also a kind of curse,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
Energetic, it's like a curse, and so I didn't want to be involved with any of that.
So, I mean, so basically, for your son and for yourself, instead of the meds that you're on, you changed your diet, and that was the end of that, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's not the only thing I did, because I was starting to say that when he went to school, I started getting interested in energy medicine,
Okay.
because I had been meaning to go into academia and becoming a professor and all that. And it, I mean, I had cut all the ties with academia just because it was not, uh, I mean, it was not possible. Because what I wanted to do was teach a high level Italian literature to Italians. And if you're not in the system, they won't let you do that. And so
Okay.
if I stayed in
So we're
Florence,
both literature teachers.
yes, I would be like teaching English to Italian students, or teaching basic Italian to English speaking students. And I thought, well, I don't want to do that. And so I was kind of at loose ends. And I got this phone call from my sister saying that she had telling me about an experience that she'd had. She said, "Oh, this is the weirdest experience. You'll love it." I was like, "Well, with an introduction like that, I have to look into this." And so she had an energy treatment. Um, and so that was how I got into energy medicine, because I
Ah, okay.
called the one practitioner who was in Italy at the time, and he was teaching a course, and I took the course, and I was like, wow, I love this stuff, and that's didn't stop since. Haven't
Wow.
stopped
So
since.
look, so Grace, if somebody needs to get or wants to get in touch with you to know more about what you do, about energy medicine and all the rest of it, how can they get in touch with you?
Well, I have a website, which is called renaissancehealth.com, spelled the English way, so Renaissance, NASCENC,
Okay.
health.com. And I also have for if they have autoimmune trouble, um, I have this new website that's called the msreset.com. I think it's just msreset.com.
All right. Smashing.
So that has my contacts and what I'm doing and what I propose that they do to do the same thing that I did, but without all the dead ends and false starts.
Fantastic. Thank you, Grace, for sharing your story. That's amazing.
Thank you for having me on here.
Ah, what an inspiring chat with Grace. And all the more inspiring because it was Grace's son who actually inspired her to change her diet without even realizing it. And scientifically, there aren't many confirmed studies about multiple sclerosis and sugar. But there are plenty of studies to show that high sugar intake can promote inflammation and lead to more aggressive symptoms in diseases such as multiple sclerosis. And also, high sugar intake is also linked with a higher risk of other conditions like diabetes and heart disease, and those conditions may exacerbate the symptoms of MS. So, bottom line, as Grace was saying, and as I've said all through this podcast, The less refined and added sugars you eat, the better for your health all round. And if you're at the stage of your life now where you finally have time to think of yourself and look after yourself, and if you're at a point where you know you have to start looking under the hood of your relationship with sugar and figure out what's really going on that's causing those cravings and preventing you from losing the weight you want to lose and feeling as good as you want to feel, I'm preparing something very special for you, my brand new 90-day program, Freedom from Cravings Formula. It will be out in the fall of 2023, and if you're on my mailing list, you'll be getting all the details very soon. And if you're not on my mailing list yet, then look in the show notes along with this episode and go download your 5 tips to start getting rid of cravings. That'll put you on my mailing list, and then you'll get all the latest news about how to sign up for the 90-day program, Freedom from Cravings Formula. That's it for this week. Keep in touch and see you soon for another episode.